Ah, the SAT. I mean, we've all heard of it, right? Many of us have felt that intense pressure. But here's the thing. What most of us don't know is the real story, where it actually came from and what it was really built to do. So let's get into it.
It's just a crazy amount of pressure for one test, isn't it? I mean, think about it. This one score, it can be the deciding factor for getting into college. It can open doors to scholarships. It can literally shape your entire career. We're taught to see it as this pure, objective measure of your potential. You know, the key to a real meritocracy.
And yeah, that's really the big question we're tackling here. We just kind of assume it was designed to be fair, right? To find the smartest kids no matter where they came from. But the actual story, well, it's a lot more complicated. And it starts in a place you would absolutely never guess.
So get this. The story of the SAT doesn't start in a classroom. It starts on the battlefield. Seriously. When the U.S. jumped into World War I back in 1917, they had this huge logistical nightmare on their hands. How in the world do you sort and classify millions of new soldiers and do it fast?
The scale of this was just mind-boggling. Nothing like it had ever been done before, so the American Psychological Association steps in and creates something called the Army Testing Project. They ended up assessing almost 2 million soldiers, and this became the very first blueprint for mass standardized testing in America. It was a tool built for one reason, and one reason only: to sort people.
And you can see right away how this idea of sorting was just baked in from the very beginning. They didn't just make one test, they made two. You had the Army Alpha test. That was for soldiers who could read and speak English. Your score on that could decide if you became an officer. Then there was the Army Beta. That was a picture-based test for, well, everyone else. Immigrants who didn't speak English, people who couldn't read. So boom, right there, a two-tiered system is built into the foundation. And honestly, calling it standardized was a bit of a stretch. I mean, these tests were given in terrible conditions. We're talking poorly lit mess halls, storage rooms. Some guys were literally sitting on the floor trying to take a test. And get this, the guys taking the Alpha test, they got detailed instructions, they knew what it was for. But the Beta takers, they were given almost no information. So, surprise, surprise, when the most disadvantaged group scored lower, did the system blame the horrible unequal conditions? Nope, it blamed the people. It said the low scores were proof that they were just naturally inferior.
Now, you gotta remember, this new technology of mass testing didn't just appear out of nowhere. It landed right in the middle of a very powerful and, frankly, very popular intellectual movement at the time, a movement that was absolutely obsessed with sorting people: eugenics. The eugenics movement already had the ideology, and now, suddenly, it had the perfect tool.
And we have to be clear about this. Eugenics wasn't some fringe crackpot belief back then. It was considered a mainstream science. It was pushed by top intellectuals, especially during the progressive era. And the goal was pretty straightforward: social control. It was all about preserving the power of dominant groups by controlling who was considered fit enough to have children.
I mean, if you want to know just how mainstream this was, look no further than this quote. It's from a U.S. Supreme Court decision, a decision that upheld forced sterilization. And it was written in 1927. That's just 1 year after the very first SAT was given. This is the world that the SAT was born into. It's pretty chilling.
So that original name, the Scholastic Aptitude Test, that was no accident. The word aptitude wasn't just some neutral term back then. In that scientific community, it was basically code. It meant native capacity. This idea of a fixed genetic intelligence that eugenicists believed you were born with and that could never, ever change.
Okay, so how does this military sorting tool, soaked in eugenics ideology, end up becoming the college entrance exam? Well, the answer really comes down to one guy, a Princeton psychologist named Carl Brigham. He's the person who directly connects all these dots.
And when you look at the timeline, it's just undeniable. It's a straight line. 1917, the Army creates the test. 1923, Carl Brigham uses the Army's test data to publish a book arguing that American intelligence is going down because of racial mixing. And then, just 3 years after that, who does the College Board hire to design the SAT? That exact same guy.
And Brigham was crystal clear about what he was trying to do. He wasn't trying to build some kind of ladder for everyone to climb. No, he wanted to create what he called an aristocracy of aptitude. He wanted to use this test to find and promote the people he believed had superior inborn talent. From the very, very beginning, it was designed to be a filter.
And boy, did the test take off. It spread like wildfire, especially among the elite universities. But here's the interesting part.
It wasn't because of its supposed scientific basis. The real reason it was so popular? It was just efficient. It gave these schools a super quick, easy-to-read number to sort a huge growing pile of applications. It became the ultimate tool for gatekeeping.
But then, the story takes this really dramatic twist. The guy who designed the whole thing, Carl Brigham, the same eugenicist, he completely turned on his own creation. He seems to have had this major crisis of conscience, and he publicly disavowed the very ideas his work was built on.
Just to remind you, his original stance, the one from that 1923 book that got him the job creating the SAT, was totally unambiguous. He was all in on the idea that intelligence was genetic and that, some races were just born superior.
But then, by the 1930s, he did a complete 180. He came out and admitted that the test didn't measure innate ability at all. He said it was just a composite, a reflection of everything else. A student's schooling, their family's money, their background, all of it. He basically realized his test wasn't measuring potential, it was measuring privilege.
But here's the crazy part. Even after this bombshell confession from its own creator, the machine just kept on rolling. The test was too useful to get rid of. But that word, aptitude, it had become toxic. So the College Board started this long, slow public relations campaign to rebrand the test. First, it became the SAT-I reasoning test. And eventually, they just dropped the words altogether. Today, the letters SAT, they officially stand for absolutely nothing.
So, the big question is, did changing the name actually change what the test does? Well, you look at the data nearly a century later, and it kind of suggests that its original purpose, that sorting function, is still very much alive and well.
Just take a look at these numbers from the class of 2020. The gaps in scores are, well, they're stark. The average math score for Black students was 454. For white students, 547. For Asian students, 632. And maybe even more telling, less than a quarter of Black students who took the test met the college readiness benchmark. It seems pretty clear that original sorting mechanism is still doing its job.
Yeah, when you see it laid out like this as a chart, the gap is just impossible to ignore. We're not talking about small differences here. These are huge, persistent gaps that seem to reflect the exact same systemic inequalities that the test's own creator eventually admitted he was measuring all along. All of this, the history, the data, it's led to a really big backlash from institutions. Probably the biggest example is the University of California system. First, they voted to go test optional, but then they took it a step further and went completely test blind. That means for California applicants, they won't even look at an SAT score if you send one in.
And this really gets to the heart of the irony, and why this all matters so much. Colleges aren't ditching the SAT because it's broken or because it's a bad test. In a way, they're dropping it because it works too well at doing the one thing it's always done, perfectly measuring the deep-seated inequality it was born from. So, this leaves us with a really fundamental question, doesn't it? If this old tool we used to measure merit was built on such a flawed and frankly dark foundation, what do we build to replace it? How do we find a way to measure potential and create real opportunity without just accidentally repeating the mistakes of the past and building a brand new sorting engine?